The room smelled like fresh paint and old ambition. That was the first thing Lyra Osei-Darko noticed when she walked into the seminar hall at the University of Toronto's Faculty of Medicine on a Tuesday in late October. The kind of room that had probably hosted 100 brilliant people and quietly crushed a dozen more. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, portraits on the walls of men in suits, all of them looking like they had never once doubted themselves. Lyra was 26 years old. She was wearing a gray hoodie with a small Velcro repair on the left cuff, the kind of fix you learn to do fast, when you've spent 3 years in uniform and can't always afford to replace what gets torn. She had a backpack on one shoulder and a conference lanyard she hadn't put on yet because she wasn't sure she was staying. She almost didn't come at all. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier through a chain of emails she almost deleted. A surgical innovation symposium. Invited attendees only. Her supervisor at the Sunnybrook Research Lab, Dr. Oyalaran, had forwarded it with a single line, "You should go. You won't regret it." Lyra had read that email 3 times and then closed her laptop. She was a second-year research fellow. She had not published yet. She had a first degree from a university in Halifax that most people at this symposium had probably never visited, and she had spent 3 years before that in the Canadian Armed Forces as a combat medic, doing things that don't appear on any resume you'd hand to an academic panel. She had learned to read a wound in 4 seconds flat, to make decisions with incomplete information, to stay calm when everyone around her was not. None of that was on the program. She went anyway, because Dr. Oyalaran had never steered her wrong, and because Lyra had a habit, formed early and held tight, of walking into rooms that made her uncomfortable. The man at the front was Dr. Callum Ashbridge. If you haven't heard of him, that's fine. But if you move in surgical research circles in this country, you know the name. Endovascular neurosurgery. 17 years at Mount Sinai. Papers in the Lancet, in the New England Journal, in places that still matter. He was 61, silver-haired, and he had a way of standing at the front of a room that suggested he had long ago decided rooms belonged to him. He was presenting findings from a study he'd led for the past 2 years. A new intraoperative imaging protocol for detecting microbleeds during aneurysm repair. The kind of work that, if it held up, would change how surgeons operated on some of the most dangerous cases in the field. Lyra had read the pre-circulated abstract the night before, twice, then a third time at 6 in the morning with her coffee. Something had bothered her. She couldn't place it exactly. Just a feeling, the kind she'd learned in the field not to ignore, the quiet alarm that sounds before you can name the reason. She sat near the back. She didn't know anyone in the room. People in front of her had name tags with institutions she recognized. McGill, UBC, Ottawa, the Sick Kids Research Wing. She had Sunnybrook on her tag, but the name above it meant nothing to most of them. That was fine. She was used to that. Ashbridge spoke for 40 minutes. He was good at it. The kind of speaker who makes difficult things feel accessible without actually making them accessible. Who uses the right amount of humor to keep people comfortable. Who paces the room in a way that fills it. Lyra watched him and listened and took notes on paper, which she still preferred to a laptop because her handwriting was faster than her typing, and she thought better when her hand moved. The session ended. There was a break. Then Ashbridge opened the floor. 3 questions from the front rows, all of them from people Lyra recognized from the name tags, senior researchers, a department head from Vancouver, someone who had collaborated with Ashbridge before. The questions were good. His answers were confident. The room had the particular energy of people who expected to agree with each other. Lyra looked at her notes. There was a number that didn't add up. It had been sitting at the edge of her attention since the abstract, and now, having heard the full presentation, it was no longer at the edge. It was in the center, the control cohort in the imaging trial. The time frame he cited for baseline data collection didn't align with the protocol revision date he'd mentioned in passing, almost as a footnote. near the end of the presentation. If the protocol had been revised mid-collection, the baseline data was not a clean baseline. It was composite, and if the baseline was composite, the comparative findings were. She stopped herself. She looked around the room. Nobody else was writing anything down. Several people were nodding. She thought about saying nothing. She was very good at saying nothing when the situation called for it. 3 years in uniform will teach you that silence is a strategy, and choosing when to speak is its own kind of discipline. But she had also learned, in a different kind of room, under different kinds of pressure, that staying quiet about a thing you can see clearly is not discipline, it's something else. She raised her hand. Ashbridge didn't see it immediately. He was answering the Vancouver question, wrapping up, already looking toward the next segment. Then someone near Lyra shifted, and he followed the movement, and his eyes landed on her. There was a pause, very small, the kind most people wouldn't notice. Lyra noticed. "Yes," he said, not a question. "Thank you for the presentation," she said. She kept her voice even. "I wanted to ask about the control cohort baseline. You cited data collection from January through November of the first year. But you mentioned the imaging protocol was revised in the spring of that year. March, I think you said. Can you clarify whether the pre- and post-revision data were separated in the analysis or treated as a single baseline?" Ashbridge looked at her for a moment. "The protocol revision was minor," he said. "Procedural. It didn't affect data integrity." "I understand," Lyra said. "But in the published methods, any protocol change mid-collections typically requires a subgroup disclosure, even for minor revisions. I didn't see that in the pre-circulated abstract." "Was it addressed in the full paper?" Something changed in the room. Not dramatically. Just a small shift, like a window opening. Ashbridge's expression didn't change, but his posture did. "Who are you with?" he asked. "Sunnybrook. Research Fellowship. 2nd year." Another pause, this one less small. "The revision was documented," he said. "It's in the supplementary materials. I'd like to look at those," she said. "Thank you." She sat back. She wrote 2 words in her notebook. Then she stopped writing and looked at the front of the room. Ashbridge moved on. The session continued. But the Vancouver researcher turned around and looked at her, and she met his eyes, and he gave her a small nod. She didn't go to the lunch. She ate a sandwich she'd packed in her bag. Old habit. You pack your own food when you learn not to count on a meal being where you expect it, and sat in a side corridor with her notes and the symposium proceedings on her phone, looking for the supplementary materials Ashbridge had mentioned. They weren't included in the digital package. She sent an email to the symposium coordinator asking for the full document set. Then she put her phone away and ate the second half of her sandwich, and watched people walk back and forth down the corridor and thought about the baseline data and the timeline and the quiet math of what it meant if the numbers didn't hold. This is the part that people outside research sometimes don't understand. The work of finding an error is not dramatic. It's not a confrontation. It's slow and careful and often tedious, and it requires a certain willingness to be wrong, to look at a thing from every possible angle before you say what you're looking at. Lyra had learned that in medical training, and she'd reinforced it in the field, where the cost of misreading a situation was not a failed paper, but something else entirely. She went back in for the afternoon sessions. After the day ended, 3 people stopped her in the hallway. The first was a woman she didn't know. 50s, gray blazer, badge from Ottawa, who said, "Good question this morning," and kept walking. The second was a graduate student who asked if she'd be willing to share her notes, and she said she would. The third was Dr. Ashbridge. He found her near the coat check, and to his credit, he didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had spent the last 4 hours deciding how to handle something. "The question you raised," he said without preamble. "Yes," she said. "You're right that the baseline collection overlapped the revision window." She waited. "We ran a sensitivity analysis to account for it," he said. It wasn't included in the abstract. It should have been. She looked at him. He was not a small man, and he was used to being the largest presence in whatever space he occupied. Right now he looked not small exactly, but reduced, like a man taking up the correct amount of space instead of extra. "Is the sensitivity analysis in the supplementary materials?" she asked. "It will be," he said, "in the revised version." "Okay," she said. "I'll be adding an acknowledgement in the corrections note," he said, to the question raised in discussion. "It would be appropriate to include your name." Lyra picked up her bag. She thought about the walk back to the subway, and the 2 stops home, and the leftover rice she had in the fridge, and the notes she still wanted to finish before tomorrow. "That's not necessary," she said. "It's standard," he said. "I know," she said. "It's still not necessary. Fix the paper. That's what matters." She put on her coat. She thanked him. And she walked out through the glass doors into the October cold, which in Toronto at that hour has a particular quality. Sharp, a little damp, not unfriendly, and she pulled up the transit app and found the next train and went home. The correction was published 6 weeks later. It was a small notice, the kind that appears in the journal's online supplement. 3 lines. It disclosed the protocol revision overlap, noted the inclusion of a sensitivity analysis that confirmed the core findings remained statistically robust, and acknowledged a question raised during the Toronto symposium that had prompted the clarification. No name. Lyra found out about it from Dr. Osei-Darko, who forwarded her the link with the same single-line email style she used for everything. "This is you. Quietly well done." Lyra read the correction notice once. Then she saved it. Not because she needed recognition, she had spent enough time in service to know that a lot of good work gets done without anyone writing your name on it, but because it was a clean outcome. The record was corrected. The research was more reliable. Someone, somewhere, making a decision based on that paper would be working from better information. That was the whole point. If you're wondering what happened to Dr. Ashbridge, he still practices. He still publishes. The paper itself, with the corrected methodology, went on to be cited widely. His findings held up, more or less, with the tighter framing. He gave a talk in Vancouver the following spring, where, according to someone who was there, he spent 2 minutes at the start discussing the importance of rigorous baseline methodology. He didn't tell the story of the woman in the back of the room, but he said what he said, and the people who heard it may have taken it with them. And Lyra? She submitted her first paper 4 months after the symposium, peer-reviewed, accepted with minor revisions. She is still at Sunnybrook, still in the fellowship, still packing her own lunch. She told this story once to a colleague, not at length, just as an aside, the way you mention something in passing that turned out to matter. And her colleague asked her what she was thinking in that moment when she raised her hand. When the room was full of people with more credentials and longer CVs, and she was sitting at the back with a repaired sleeve and a paper notebook. She thought about it for a second. "I was thinking about the baseline," she said. "That's it. Just the baseline." Which is exactly the kind of answer that only makes sense if you understand that sometimes the most important thing in the room is not the person standing at the front of it. It's the number that doesn't add up, and the person quiet enough to see it clearly.